For most of my life, I believed I had a normal family, not the overly affectionate kind you see in movies, but stable enough to feel safe. My parents were strict, controlled, and always had a plan for everything I did. At the time, I mistook that control for care. They decided what I studied, who I spent time with, even how I spoke in front of others. Every choice was for my future, they said, and I believed them. The only person who ever made me question that belief was my grandfather. Grandpa wasn't loud or dramatic, but there was something about him, something steady and warm, that made me feel seen in a way my parents never did. When I was around him, I didn't feel like a project. I felt like a person. You're stronger than you think, he used to say, his voice calm but certain. One day you'll understand why that matters. I never understood what he meant, not until it was too late. When Grandpa fell sick, everything changed. The house that once felt controlled but predictable became tense and suffocating. My parents were suddenly always whispering behind closed doors. They monitored every phone call, every visitor, every small detail. And yet, in front of others, they played the role of the perfect, devoted children. I noticed it, but I didn't question it. I wish I had. The day Grandpa passed away, something inside me broke. But something else shifted too. The grief was overwhelming, but beneath it, there was a strange, quiet unease I couldn't explain. At first, my parents acted exactly how you'd expect. They cried. They comforted me. They handled the funeral arrangements. But within days, their behavior changed in a way that felt off. They became unusually attentive, too attentive. Suddenly, they cared about my opinions. They asked how I was feeling. They insisted I didn't need to worry about anything, especially complicated matters like legal documents or finances. We'll handle everything, my mother said gently, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. That's what parents are for. My father nodded in agreement, his tone firm. You just focus on your life. We'll take care of the rest. At the time, it sounded comforting. Now, I realize it was the beginning of something else. A few weeks later, I noticed the first crack in the illusion. I had gone into my father's study looking for a file when I saw a stack of documents partially hidden under a folder. My name was printed clearly across the top. Curious, I reached for them. But before I could read a single word, the door slammed shut behind me. What are you doing in here? My father's voice was sharp, far sharper than necessary. I froze. I was just looking for. You don't need to look at those. He interrupted quickly, stepping forward and snatching the papers away. These are complicated legal matters. You wouldn't understand. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. Not protective, defensive. That was the moment the unease began to grow into something heavier. After that, little things started adding up. Phone calls would stop the moment I entered the room. Conversations would shift. My parents began discouraging me from contacting Grandpa's lawyer, insisting it would only delay the process. They handled every document, every signature, every decision without ever really explaining anything to me. It was subtle, careful, almost invisible, but it wasn't normal. Then came the night that changed everything. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs for water. As I passed by the living room, I heard my parents' voices low, urgent, and not meant to be heard. Of 4 years, my mother whispered, "We've been careful for 4 years. We can't mess this up now." My heart stopped. 4 years, my father let out a quiet breath. Relax, everything is in place. Once the final transfer happens, it's done. They'll never even realize what we did. Silence filled the hallway, but inside me, something shattered. 4 years. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't grief or confusion. This was a plan, and somehow I was at the center of it. I didn't sleep that night. The words kept replaying in my mind over and over again like a broken recording I couldn't shut off. 4 years. Everything is in place. They'll never even realize what we did. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight, my thoughts racing. I tried to convince myself I had misunderstood, that maybe it was about something else, something harmless. But deep down, I already knew the truth. It was about me. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. I sat at the breakfast table, nodded when my parents spoke, even forced a smile when my mother asked if I was sleeping better. Every instinct in me screamed to confront them, to demand answers, but something held me back. Grandpa's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "You're stronger than you think." Strength didn't mean reacting, it meant watching, so I started paying attention. Really paying attention, and once I did, I couldn't stop seeing it. The past 4 years, things I had ignored, dismissed, or simply trusted began to rearrange themselves into something darker. 4 years ago was when everything started changing. That was when my parents suddenly pushed me to switch my university program. They said it was more practical, more secure. I didn't argue. I trusted them. Now I realized that program came with something else, financial dependency. It limited my ability to earn, to move, to make independent decisions. Then there were the friendships I lost. People I had been close to slowly drifted away, but not naturally. My parents always had something to say. Someone was a bad influence, someone else was jealous, another was distracting me from my goals. At the time, it sounded like concern. Now it sounded like isolation. Piece by piece, they had been cutting me off from anything or anyone that might have helped me think for myself. Even the smaller details began to make sense. The way they insisted on being present during important calls. The way documents were always handled before I could see them. The way they discouraged me firmly from ever contacting Grandpa's lawyer directly. It wasn't protection, it was control. By the third day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed proof. That afternoon, I waited until my parents left the house. My hands trembled as I walked into my father's study, the same room where I had been shut out before. This time, I locked the door behind me. I went straight to the drawer where I had seen the documents. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me was still afraid of what I might find, but fear didn't matter anymore. I opened the drawer. The papers were still there. Carefully, I pulled them out and began reading. At first, it was just legal language. Dense, confusing, almost designed to make me give up. But as I forced myself to keep going, certain words began to stand out. Transfer of authority, guardianship clause, conditional control of assets. My name appeared again and again, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't ownership. It was restriction. A cold wave washed over me as the truth began to take shape. This wasn't just about managing the inheritance. It was about controlling it through me, through conditions I didn't even fully understand. I flipped through more pages, my breathing uneven, until something slipped out from between the documents. A smaller, older envelope. It wasn't like the others, no official stamp, no legal formatting, just my name written in a familiar hand. My heart skipped, Grandpa. My fingers shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If you are reading this, it means things are not as they seem. My vision blurred as I read the words again. I feared this might happen. Not everyone around you can be trusted, not even those closest to you. A sharp ache spread through my chest. He knew, and I hadn't. The letter continued, each word hitting harder than the last. There are protections in place, but you must act carefully. Do not confront them yet. Find Mr. Karim. He will help you understand everything. Mr. Karim, Grandpa's lawyer. The same man my parents had insisted I stay away from. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just a trap. It was a carefully built cage. and I had been living inside it for 4 years without even realizing it. But Grandpa hadn't left me defenseless. He had left me a way out. I folded the letter slowly, my hands no longer trembling, but steady, focused. For the first time since that night, the fear began to fade. In its place, something stronger began to rise. Clarity, they thought I didn't know. They thought I was still the same obedient child they had been controlling all these years. I carefully placed everything back exactly as I had found it, unlocked the door, and stepped out of the study. This time I wasn't confused, I wasn't afraid, I had the truth, and for the first time I made a decision that was entirely my own. I wouldn't let them win. I waited 3 days before making my move, not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood what Grandpa meant about being careful. Every step I took now mattered. One wrong move, one hint of suspicion, and everything my parents had built, and everything Grandpa had prepared, could collapse before I had the chance to act. So I played my role, the same quiet, obedient version of myself they had shaped for years. I sat at dinner and listened. I nodded when they spoke about finalizing things. I even pretended to be relieved when my mother reassured me again that I didn't need to worry about the inheritance. Inside, I was watching everything, learning, waiting. On the 4th day, I told them I was going to the library. It wasn't unusual, it didn't raise questions, but instead of turning toward the main road, I took a different route, one that led me to a part of the city I hadn't visited in years. My heart pounded harder with every step. Mr. Kareem's office was exactly where I remembered it, quiet, modest, almost forgettable. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd walk right past it. For a moment, I stood outside the door, staring at the name engraved on the small brass plate. This was it, the truth, or whatever remained hidden was on the other side. I knocked, "Come in." The voice was calm. Steady, I stepped inside. Mr. Kareem looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp, observant in a way that made me feel like he already knew why I was there. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed softly, as if confirming something to himself. "I was wondering how long it would take," he said. A chill ran down my spine. "You knew I would come?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. He gestured for me to sit. "Your grandfather believed you would," he replied. "He trusted that when the time came, you would start asking the right questions." I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the chair. "Then you know what's happening." Mr. Kareem's expression darkened slightly. "I know what was planned," he said carefully, "and I know what your grandfather feared." The room felt smaller somehow. "Then tell me," I said, my voice steadier now, "because I think my parents have been controlling everything for years." He didn't look surprised. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file, placing it on the desk between us. "Your grandfather was a very thorough man," he began. "He built his wealth carefully, and he understood people just as carefully." He opened the file. Inside were documents, notes, and something else, records. Detailed, organized, undeniable. "He noticed changes in your parents years ago," Mr. Kareem continued. "Subtle at first, questions about his assets, increased involvement in legal matters, a growing interest in control." My chest tightened. "So he created a second plan," I whispered. Mr. Kareem nodded. "A protective structure," he said. "One that only activates under certain conditions." He slid a document toward me. I scanned the page, my pulse quickening. "It says here," I hesitated, trying to process the legal terms, "that the inheritance can only be fully transferred if I demonstrate independent decision making, and if no coercion or manipulation is proven." "Exactly," he said. A realization hit me. They've been trying to control me to meet those conditions, I said slowly, to make it look like everything is normal, while actually controlling the outcome. Yes, Mr. Karim replied, but they underestimated one thing. I looked up. Silence filled the room. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not confusion, but something sharper. Purpose, there's more, he added, turning a few pages. What I saw next made my breath catch. Records of conversations. Financial movements, legal drafts, evidence. They've been careful. He said, but not perfect. Your grandfather anticipated that. Over time, we've gathered enough to prove a pattern of manipulation. If needed, my mind raced. So what happens now? Mr. Karim leaned back slightly, studying me. That depends on you, he said. We can act now and challenge everything legally, but it will be messy, public, slow. I clenched my fists. And the other option, a faint, knowing look crossed his face. We let them believe they've won. The words settled heavily in the air. They'll proceed with the final transfer, he continued, confident, unquestioning, and at that moment we reveal everything. A slow, steady breath escaped me. A trap for a trap. They've spent 4 years building this, I said quietly, and your grandfather spent just as long preparing for it. Mr. Karim replied. For a moment I closed my eyes. All the confusion, the pain, the betrayal. It was still there. But now it had direction. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't the same person who had walked into that office. I'll do it, I said. Mr. Karim nodded once, as if he had expected nothing less. Then from this moment on, he said, you must be very careful, act exactly as they expect. No sudden changes, no confrontation. I stood up, my thoughts clear, my heartbeat steady. For years I had been playing a role without realizing it. Now I was choosing to play it. But this time I understood the script, and I knew exactly how it would end. The day arrived quietly, too quietly. If someone had walked into our house that morning, they would have thought it was just another ordinary day. My mother was calm, almost cheerful as she adjusted the table settings. My father moved with a confidence I hadn't seen in years, controlled, precise, certain. They thought they had already won, and for the first time I let them believe it. I played my part perfectly. I didn't question anything. I didn't hesitate when my mother reminded me about the final meeting. I even nodded when my father repeated the same rehearsed reassurance. It's just a formality, he said smoothly. After today, everything will be settled. Everything. The word echoed in my mind, but my face remained neutral. We drove together in silence. The tension in the car thick but invisible. My hands rested calmly in my lap, but inside, every emotion I had buried over the past weeks, and the past 4 years, was waiting just beneath the surface. This was it, the final move. Mr. Karim's office looked the same as it had days before, but this time it felt different. He greeted us professionally, his expression unreadable, giving nothing away. My parents didn't notice. They walked in like they belonged there, like everything inside that room was already theirs. We sat down. Documents were placed neatly on the table. The air felt heavy. This is the final authorization for the inheritance transfer, Mr. Karim said calmly, sliding the papers forward. Once signed, the process will be complete. My father leaned forward slightly, scanning the pages with practiced ease. My mother watched closely, her fingers tightening just enough to betray her anticipation. I stayed still, silent, exactly as they expected. Everything seems in order. My father said after a moment, a faint satisfaction in his voice. Of course it did. They had spent 4 years making sure of it. He picked up the pen, and that's when everything changed. Before we proceed, Mr. Karim said, his tone shifting just slightly, there is one final condition that must be addressed. My father paused, irritation flickering across his face. We've already reviewed everything. Yes, Mr. Karim replied evenly, but this condition was placed by your father. It is non-negotiable. The room fell silent. For the first time, I saw uncertainty creep into my parents' expressions. What condition? My mother asked, her voice tight. Mr. Karim folded his hands calmly. A verification of intent, he said, to ensure that the beneficiary, his eyes briefly met mine, has not been influenced, controlled, or manipulated in any way. My father let out a short, dismissive breath. That's unnecessary. Obviously, actually, Mr. Karim interrupted gently. It is necessary. He opened a file, the same file I had seen days before, but this time it wasn't hidden. It was exposed. Piece by piece, he laid out the evidence. Financial records, altered documents, patterns of control, conversations. Every carefully constructed layer my parents had built over 4 years began to unravel in seconds. This is absurd. My mother snapped, her composure cracking. This proves nothing. It proves a consistent pattern, Mr. Karim replied calmly. One that violates the conditions of the inheritance agreement. My father's face hardened. You're making a mistake. No, Mr. Karim said quietly. Your father anticipated this. Silence crashed into the room. For the first time, they looked at me not as someone to manage, not as someone to control, but as someone they didn't understand anymore. I slowly lifted my gaze to meet theirs, and I didn't look away. You planned this, my mother whispered, disbelief creeping into her voice. I shook my head gently. No, I said, my voice steady, stronger than it had ever been. You did. The words hung between us. For years I had followed their rules, trusted their decisions, believed their version of reality, but not anymore. You didn't just try to take what Grandpa left me, I continued. You tried to take my choices, my independence, my life. My father opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Because there was nothing left to say, Mr. Karim closed the file, based on the evidence. He said, his tone firm now, the inheritance will not be transferred under your authority. Full control will remain solely with the rightful beneficiary, me. It was over, just like that. 4 years of manipulation, planning, control collapsed in a single moment. My mother's expression shifted from anger to something else, something hollow. My father looked away. And for the first time in my life, I saw them not as powerful, not as controlling, but as small. I stood up slowly, my hands steady, my heart clear. I hope it was worth it. I said quietly. They didn't answer. There was nothing left for them to take, and nothing left for me to prove. As I turned to leave, a strange sense of calm settled over me. This wasn't just revenge. It was freedom, and somewhere, deep down, I felt it. Grandpa had known all along, and this time I hadn't just survived. I had won.